Welcome to the Disrupt Now podcast. This is Natalie Viglione, your host, and this is Season 2, Unlocking the Cosmic Mysteries Around New Earth Magic. My desire is to bring conversations that serve as cosmic medicine for all of the sacred souls that seek the revealing of the magic and mystery of the organic celestial energies. I powerfully step in as a sacred vessel for the Cosmic Mother, or as we can say, the divine feminine energy rising. I walk an authentic druidic path of primordial tradition, and I am here to share wisdom and the highest truth for the betterment of all beings, animals, minerals, plant life, and all that is. Please join me on this journey to explore and awaken the magic again. Welcome to the Disrupt Now podcast. I'm Natalie Viglione, the host, and I'm excited to bring this two-part series to life. We're going to break into some truths that just aren't easy to hear. And regardless, doesn't matter. We need to know them. They need to be seen, and they definitely need to be heard. And I found this guest by reading the book that he co-authored called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. Now, his journey made a deep impression on me because I knew that he went into the most difficult places to extract true, actual research and data and to confront energies in a way that I've never actually deep dived into before, from a place of pure intention, knowing that he could help people and assist people in powerful, beautiful ways. So I was very excited when he said yes to coming on to the show. We had a brilliant over 2-hour conversation on a Saturday evening, and so we're going to break this up into 2 episodes because it will be easier to digest in that format. I knew that I must share his work after I read the book because truly this is disrupting the status quo. And this status quo that I'm always talking about, that ever since I launched Disrupt Now, for which was 2018 is when it came to full life, in at least from a podcast standpoint, is a status quo that does not benefit humanity or any living creation element nor this earth. And this status quo is what we're breaking down, and we are building anew. And for this guest, who I will announce in a moment, it's the status quo around mental health and the so-called industry of psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy. So he brought real truth and proof also of what lower astral parasite energies are. There's a lot of names for these energies. There's archons. This was actually used in ancient texts like the Nag Hammadi. Some, of course, say demons, but these words to me don't capture a more true essence because it's the word parasites that really works in my knowing. And these energies are the lowest of low frequencies. They're literal and absolute parasites, and their food, in quotation marks, is loosh, which you've probably heard. Loosh is basically the consuming of human negative emotions that ooze from humans, many, and all of us throughout our existence, right? But really what this is doing is latching on to a human's energy, bringing it down. So it's also a decrease in vitality. So it's the lowest of low that equates to emotions that all stem from fear. This is jealousy, hatred, greed, consuming, that materialism, apathy, etc. The status quo of this world got us to a place where there is just so much unnecessary suffering going on. It's completely out of balance, as most of us well know, and it has been for a long time. thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But now it's time that humanity climbs out of that deep, deep hole, back into the divine placement, back into divinity, and that's really what this realm was always meant to reflect. So in this first episode, we dive into some details like this one. For example, did you know that we've got more psychiatrists, psychologists, you could say psychotherapists, there's that whole industry. There's more and more of that, plus more and more of psychiatric medications on the planet, more than ever in history of this realm. Yet guess what? Weird. People are getting mentally ill like faster and faster, but more so staying ill longer than ever before. How is that, you ask? We could ask this question, how? But if we really think about this, there's no real question as to why nor the how, but we'll dive into those reasons into this episode. Also, a human is labeled as having a quote-unquote mental illness caused by some chemical imbalance, and I'm using quotation marks here. Yet guess what? There's not a test, never has been, that actually shows there's some type of actual, real, like it's there. Here's the proof, guys. Let me show you. There's none of that about this so-called chemical imbalance. So when someone is called schizophrenic, for example, okay, well, why hasn't anyone ever slowed down for 2 seconds and said, wait, what? Wait, who and what are these voices exactly, and why are they there? Because the voices are more than just what we call quote-unquote mental illness. So in this part one, in this two-part conversation, you're going to find out exactly what my guest, Jerry Marzinsky, found out. Jerry Marzinsky is someone, again, who his journey has been extremely unique. And the way that I look at this is I'm so thankful for the many of us all around the globe that stop and ask, wait, why? Wait, what? Wait. Now, how? Right? Some of us serve as the sacred warriors, which has nothing to do with the word that has become known as war. Rather, the word warrior, the root etymology of that word means a human that holds bravery, or anybody, any species of being that holds bravery and courage, stands up to protect and serve as guardians of the old ways, as I would put it. So today, instead of grabbing a sword and running to the castle, the way a warrior rises is asking these harder, very simple, but harder questions. Standing up, speaking out when things are not right, standing up for those without voices, and then sharing those truths no matter what. So as Jerry will point out, this is another cold hard fact. The antidepressant market was expected to reach $15.98 billion by 2023. So did it reach that? Oh, indeed it did. In fact, it far surpassed that number. That's incredibly sad. According to SNS Insider, the antidepressants market size was actually valued at $19.92 billion in 2023, and I have the resource linked below if you would like to read that. This should never be the case. That's why, though, some of us were put on this planet. Stand up, state hard truths, even when they're hard to take in. Jerry Marzinsky is one of those helping to dispel, meaning to break the spell of the ivory tower that surrounds the industry of mental illness, psychiatry, and more. And he's a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of those that have been deemed quote-unquote psychotic and criminally insane in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions and prisons in the world. His formal academic training comprises of a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in the PhD psychology program. So he now has a private practice, and as I mentioned, is the co-author of An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. So let's dive into part 1, Breaking the Spell, Truths about the Existence of Lower Astral Parasites and Negative Energy Attachments. Don't forget, there will be a part 2. Welcome back, Jerry. I am so excited to dig in. We have so much to talk about. I know that we're going to go into all kinds of intriguing, very important places to talk about today. So thank you for being here.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me.
As I talked about in the intro, your journey really had an impression on me as truth speakers. We're all bringing these different aspects in, and this one is a particularly difficult one, but it's obviously a topic that a lot of people don't want to know. And if they do have the inclination in which says, okay, I know it's real, it's still a denial phase that I think everyone goes through in some degree. But what I would love to begin with, there's a lot of ways to address lower astral energy, corrupted technology, negative beings, negative faction. There's a billion ways to address this, whatever we want to say. But I would really love to hear your story and how you broke into this knowing, and maybe even some of that process that you had to go through to be like, whoa, is this real? Let's begin there and see where we go.
Oh, got to begin before that was way down the line. Got to a point where I was wondering if I was losing my sanity. Let's got into this. I came from a very dysfunctional family, fairly violent. There was mental illness there. After being raised in that mess, I came out of there going, who am I? What am I? I was a mess coming out of there. Like, I got to straighten myself out. I got to figure what I'm going to do. My first psychology course I found very interesting. And then it was like a toss up between psychology and sociology, but there's not a whole lot you can do with sociology.
Right.
And then when I took abnormal psychology, it was like that just lit a fire. It's like, why are these guys crazy? What is going on with this? Why, but there weren't any answers. They were just descriptions. Bipolar is this, and paranoid schizophrenia is that, and undifferentiated schizophrenia is this, and narcissism is this. But they didn't have any answers. They didn't have any. What do you do about it? The only thing that was happening is they were giving all these people different kinds of drugs.
Right.
So I'm like, what are these mental illnesses? What are they? And all they had was descriptions of the behavior. There was no cause. They didn't know what caused any of it.
Yeah.
So I'm like reading through the abnormal psychology book. I'm like, okay, I got that, and then I got that, and I got that, and I got that, and it was like everybody had the same feeling. There's parts of us that fit all these different classifications in that book. And but one thing I hated about undergraduate psychology was there was no way to see for yourself if any of it was true. You couldn't get into a mental health center. You couldn't get into a psychiatric hospital. You couldn't get into a state hospital. You couldn't get into a mental health center and say, hey, let me take a look around. Let me see what's going on.
Let me assess.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, over the entire more than 40 years that I spent on the front lines of mental health, I have never, ever seen a researcher on the front lines. Ever. They all come from the universities. They sit up there in their ivory tower, and who knows what they use for a patient population? Who knows? Because they're not on the front lines. And even if they tried to get on the front lines, they wouldn't let them in. A researcher or even a visitor couldn't get into the prison without a swarm of administrators around him to make sure he didn't talk to the wrong prisoner about stuff. They wouldn't let you into a mental hospital because they go, oh, it's too dangerous. We can't take responsibility for you. they won't let researchers on the front lines, even if they wanted to get onto the front lines. So the only way to really research what's going on is to actually become one of them and already be on the inside.
Right.
Now, that's nothing that I planned to do. It wasn't in my plans. It was just I was frustrated because here they're teaching me all this stuff. And the only class that I could say that I could go into a lab and see for myself what was actually going on was experimental psychology, where you could go into a rat lab and you could see these schedules. You could see the behavior change. You could see them react the way they were predicted to react. But the rest of it is just stuff. It was somewhat interesting stuff, but I found out later after I got out of undergraduate school that 80% of what psychologists publish in universities is not replicable, which means it's garbage
Right.
and it's publish or perish. You either
Yeah.
publish something, make the university look good, or we don't want you here. And it doesn't matter what you publish as long as you get it published. And I saw that when I was in the PhD program. I wanted to do something that meant something. The advisor said, no, don't do that. Just do your little research on this area and just add it to the thousands of research things that have already been done. So it's just like get something published. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how important it is or if it serves any purpose whatsoever. Just get it published. That's what they're doing. Publish or perish.
Right.
Now, I didn't know that at the time. I had to learn that gradually. So because of the way I was raised, I did not trust authority. It was just deep inside. I did not trust them.
Yeah.
So here I am having to memorize all this tons of material in all these psych books and spit it back out. And I had no way to see whether it's true or not. It's, oh, just believe us. So I'm like, okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but I was watching them with a skewed eye. And then one day in clinical, what was it? It was, yeah, it was abnormal psychology. We were assigned a research article by a clinical psychologist who wrote that if two crazy people met face to face and they both thought they were Trudeau, one of them would have to change that delusion into another delusion. And I'm like, why would they have to do that? They're both crazy. What would it matter? But here's this clinical psychologist saying, no, one of them would have to change and have a different delusion. They can't both have the same delusion. I'm like, why not? But I couldn't get onto into anywhere to prove that. Fast forward probably another, what would it be? It might be 8 or 9 years. I'd graduated from undergrad or from graduate school. I got a job at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet. There were like 10,000 patients there, Central Georgia, Milledgeville State Hospital. And I was doing rounds on the second floor. And I saw a new guy, a new prisoner, and he was talking to himself. And one thing I saw was in graduate school, they would talk about voices. They would say they were hallucinations. They wouldn't ever describe what they said or what they were like. They would just say, oh, they're hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, they call them. So I thought they were like word cabbage. I thought the guy would just be babbling incoherent sentences.
Right.
It wasn't like that. They were talking to these voices in full languages, full comprehensible languages, and they were carrying on full conversations with these voices. And they were arguing with them and they were fighting with them and they were talking to them and they were trying to reason with them. And it was just like they were talking to somebody on the phone, but you could only hear them. You couldn't hear the voices. So that surprised me because I didn't think the voices would be intelligible.
Right.
But it appeared to me that these guys were finding them intelligible. So I was doing my rounds on the second floor of this big psychiatric unit and I saw a new guy and I went, I haven't seen him before. Better go check him out and see what he's about. And he's talking to his voices. So I crept up behind him and he caught me. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm Jerry. I'm the psych for this unit. I haven't seen you here before. I said, when'd you get here? He said, oh, I got here a few days ago. I said, what's your name? He said, I'm Jesus Christ. And I sat back and I thought, and I went back to that assignment back in undergraduate school. And I looked him in the eye in the middle of the day room and I said, no, you can't be Jesus Christ because I am. And I stood there going, okay, now what's he going to do? Was this guy full of crap? And the guy cocks his eyes and he thinks about it a minute. And then he looks me in the eye and he goes, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he strolls off. And I said, what else did they lie to me about?
And
What else? So right away, I don't trust these people.
yeah.
So I was always on the lookout. So when I got to work at the state hospital, one thing I noticed is that nobody was interested in what these voices were telling these schizophrenic patients. There were tons of them there. I noticed that if they were listening to these voices, they got in more trouble. They were more agitated. They were more likely to get into fights. They were more likely to cause a commotion. They were more likely to get in trouble in their classes than if they weren't listening to those voices or if those voices were weaker. I'm like, okay, there's a correlation between how much trouble they're getting into and how much time they're spending listening to these voices or how strong these voices are. And I'd ask the nurses, I'd ask the attendants, the psychiatrists, what are these voices? And all of them would just say, they're just hallucinations. What are they saying? Oh, we don't know. And they didn't want to know. They didn't care. They weren't the least bit interested. Here's this whole hospital with hundreds and hundreds of staff, and none of them are interested in what these voices are telling these people. Like, it was hard to believe.
10,000 patients.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the size of a small city.
It's crazy.
It was like 3,000 acres.
That's literally more people than where we live.
Yeah.
In
There
the
was
town.
these big brick buildings, the towering brick buildings with
Yeah.
floor after floor full of psychiatric patients.
Wow.
It was the main dumping ground for the state of Georgia. Where was I?
Jesus Christ.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, so it went from there that I'm watching, and here they are all believing that the voices are hallucinations, and they're caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain, which is what they're teaching in the graduate schools. That's what they're teaching in the psych books. It's a chemical imbalance that causes mental illness. But one thing I saw after being there years, I never, ever once saw a psychiatrist give any kind of test, no blood work, no lab work, no EEG, no EKG, no valid objective test to measure how far the brain was out of balance or by how much. Which neurotransmitters were out of balance or by how much. So I think there's something like 23 neurotransmitters in the brain. Which ones are out of balance? So if you're saying they're out of balance and your meds balance them, you need to at least know which ones are out of balance and by how much to treat it. I never saw them give a lab test to determine which neurotransmitters were out of balance or by how much ever. So I asked them one day, I said, how do you know what's out of balance if you're not given any kind of test? He goes, oh, we don't mess with that. The drug companies do that. They take care of that stuff and they just tell us which drugs to give. And I'm like, what? It's like letting the fox in the hen house. It's like unfreaking believable. I later found out that they have no idea what the chemical balance of the neurotransmitters in the brain actually is or what it should be. It's a lie. It's
Let
a
alone
total
what they
friggin'
do
lie.
on, the truth of what they do.
Right.
Yeah.
It was made up by Eli Lilly when they came out with Prozac, a drug company. They needed some explanation as to why their drugs worked. So they made one up. Oh, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Our drugs are chemicals and the brain is made of chemicals. So there must be some kind of something that it puts into balance that makes people less agitated. It's a complete lie. It was a fabrication. And they've perpetuated this fraud on the entire planet. Now they're teaching it in universities, they're teaching it in undergraduate school. It's a complete lie. It's been busted over and over again. And still, you look at these ads for the big pharma. Oh, it's believed that schizophrenia is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. They started off blaming mothers. Oh, the mothers did something to the kids that give them schizophrenia. And the mothers went, we didn't do anything. I got a cold. So they went from that. Now, that was observable.
Yeah.
You could see if mothers are doing something, you would see it, you know. So they needed something that was unobservable. So they moved it to genetics. They went, oh, it's a genetic abnormality. Mental illness is caused by genetics, it's caused by genes. Now, who can see that? There's only a very small number of geneticists who could prove or disprove that. They
Right.
got away with that for decades. Oh, yeah, it's a genetic abnormality. The only thing you can do about it is take our toxic meds. Then the geneticists came up and went, finally, when they got around to looking into it, they went, We don't see any genetic marker for mental illness. There's none there." Oh, that's because it's a bunch of genes all mixed together. It's thousands of them, and it's going to take forever to figure out how it works. Bunch of bozos.
I know, but and that the crazy thing is that, like you said, this occurs to this day, regardless of how much has come out to say the opposite, to discredit all of the bullshit. But the other element to it too is clearly the person to come in and be like, I'm sorry, why? Why? This question of why? How? These are questions that obviously no one was asking for how long. That's the most intriguing thing to me is no one's asking these are the most simple questions.
No, because they've got everybody distracted by all this bull crap.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a genetic abnormality. Well, you can't do anything about it. You got to listen to us. What are you going to do about a genetic imbalance? And the reason for all this is the antidepressant market, antidepressants in the US is to reach $15.98 billion by 2023. This is $1 billion. Now, we're not talking millions. $15.98 billion by 2023. The global antipsychotic market hit 14.54 billion in 2021 and is expected to reach 15.5 billion by 2022. These drugs cure absolutely nothing. All they do is treat symptoms. So what we're talking about is the Western mental health system here.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me read their report card to you. There's about 24 million schizophrenics estimated worldwide, 300 million in the US. These reports 50,000, close to 50,000 Americans kill themselves every friggin' year in the US. We're talking 50,000. That's as many who died in the entire Vietnam War, year after year after year. We got more psychiatrists here now, more psychologists, and more psychiatric medications on the planet now than we've ever had in the entire history of mankind. And more people are getting mentally ill faster and staying ill longer than ever before. CDC reports that 132 people in the US kill themselves every day. Every day.
Oh my God.
Suicide rate is the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2021, 48,000 Americans killed themselves. Between 2000 and 2018, suicide rates increased 37%. Between 1999 and 2019, suicide rate in the US increased 33%, despite the massive increase in antidepressant sales. 10,000 Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia every year. Schizophrenia is the top 10 health problems on the planet right now. And what are these guys doing about it? Drugging people senseless. None of those drugs are curing anything. They're
No.
just treating symptoms. They're not getting at the cause at all. They don't want to get at the cause. They're making too much money. They have reduced research spending for schizophrenia down to a mere dribble. And then they manipulated these statistics to make it look like they were spending more money on it. They don't want a cure.
Right.
They're making too much money.
Right.
You don't make money curing people.
No.
You make money treating symptoms, and that's what they're doing.
And from your professional opinion, does it even treat symptoms, or does it actually aggravate and make things worse?
It does both.
Yeah.
The side effects of now Geodon. Here's side effects of one of the antipsychotic drugs. Okay, so this will. It's like a major tranquilizer.
Yeah.
Okay, so the effect it will have on the voices, it will quiet them down. It will not get rid of them. It will quiet them down because you're using a physical medicine on an energetic entity. It's like pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field and expecting it to go away. It's not going to treat the cause. Geodon, some of these side effects are skin rash, a feeling of restlessness with an inability to sit still, constipation, dizziness, drowsiness, excessive saliva, extrapyramidal disease. That means you use it long enough, there's an uncontrolled shaking of your hands and body. generalized weakness, headache, nausea, weight gain, chest pain, fast heartbeat, low potassium. These drugs are dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay. These are not recreational drugs.
No.
Nobody wants to take these. Nobody in their right mind wants to take them. Nobody in their wrong mind wants to take them. The psychiatric patients don't want to take these drugs. They take them because there's nothing else and they're told to by authorities.
Exactly.
So you have that stuff going on, but it will sedate them so they're easier to manage. They're not as violent, they're not as volatile, they're easier for staff to manage. But it doesn't get to the cause of the problem.
By a long shot. And in your book, the story of what has been done to mental patients for generations is, I remember in psychology learning about some of these things because I also was very drawn into psychology and abnormal specifically as well. And it's just, I almost don't have words for what has been done to humans in the sake of quote unquote medicine. It's horrendous, truly horrendous, beyond horrendous, really. There's no word for it, I think.
Yeah, and they're still doing it. Those neuroleptic drugs, they found when they started doing autopsies on long-term patients in state hospitals that were taking antipsychotic drugs, that their brains were shrunk like walnuts. They would just shrivel up. And time after time, when they did the autopsy, they found that. And all these people were on these antipsychotic drugs for long periods of time. And so they finally, the researchers who were doing this finally said, hey, it looks like these neuroleptic drugs are causing neurological damage, permanent neurological damage. So they published the paper on that. And a lot of times they won't even get that far because the drug companies will not allow them to publish in the journals and say, okay, if you publish this, we're going to cut off your funding. They control the universities. They control the government so that they allow what gets out and what doesn't get out.
Yep.
So as soon as they found out about that, they went nuts. The psychiatric mafia and big pharma going, no, it's the schizophrenia that's causing that. It's not our drugs. So the researchers went, okay, we'll give them to rats and monkeys too and watch what happens. Their brain shrunk too. So these drugs are actually doing permanent neurological damage to these patients when they're being used for long periods of time. And a lot of psychiatrists are saying schizophrenia is a lifetime sentence. You have no choice but to take these for the rest of your life. They're destroying their peripheral nervous system, they're destroying their central nervous system. And what was even more egregious than that, I saw at the state hospital, is when they did start showing these extrapyramidal effects from the drugs, shaking, the quivering from the drugs, they would give them cogentin to cover that up. So here they're given another drug to cover up that shaking while the damage is continuing. No conscience whatsoever. They didn't know what else to do. That's all they had. That's what they used back then. Here's an article on the lie with the biological imbalance, the brain balance. So it said it was not until the late 1980s, after release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of the chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric mainstream. As psychiatrist Peter Brigham, who wrote Toxic Psychiatry, you want to know about how slimy these people are, read that book, Toxic Psychiatry. Peter Brigham in 1991 points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There was, of course, no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any chemical imbalance, but Eli Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychologists alike came to identify with the idea of mental disorders as being caused by chemical imbalances of the brain. It's a complete fabrication. It's a complete lie.
Yeah.
So here's another lie on their part. And then the other lie is their DSM. See if I have anything there. Their directory of psychiatric illnesses.
Oh, I remember you touching on that in the book as well.
Yeah, completely made up. Let me see if I have anything on it. Yeah, here it is. It says the DSM contains nearly 300 impressive looking but completely fabricated mental illnesses that were dreamed up by a small group of psychiatrists and presented in periodic meetings where 2/3 of their number had close ties to big pharma. Julian Whitaker, a psychiatrist, he says every single one of those mental illnesses were fabricated by breaking up segments of human behavior and pathologizing them. There are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, there's no x-rays, EEGs to validate even a single one of these psychiatric illnesses. They are just classes of behavior that a group of psychiatrists have voted to be mental disorders. Dr. Julian Whitaker. And that DSM, it looks impressive. It looks like a real work of science.
Right.
But it has all these categories. It has numbers, this numbering system. It has these fancy descriptions. They teach it in graduate school. In the PhD program, that was their Bible. You had to memorize all these diagnoses as if they were real.
Right.
Nobody ever knew that they were made up by psychiatrists. It was like they were treated as if they were real. And
Right.
the educational system is complicit in fabricating this falsity, this fraud right now. They're all made up.
And they're very calm. I remember you mentioning unhappiness is labeled as depression, as if that could be set. Oh, you're mentally ill if you get unhappy.
Or kids fighting is a sibling relational disorder. Everything's
a disorder, right?
Now they tried to make it a disease, but the medical establishment wouldn't let them get away with that. They go, no, your diagnoses are not diseases. They don't fit diseases. There's a physical cause for a disease. You've got no cause for this stuff. So they just kept going at it. In 1952, the DSM-1 contained 106 psychiatric illnesses. In 1980, the DSM-2 contained 256. The DSM-5 now has 297 disorders. And their number grows every couple of years. They just keep making these things up, and then they put them in there, and now they can charge insurance companies for treating these things if they can come up with some kind of drug that they say treats it. Now, it gets totally ridiculous. Like you were talking about, they have something called a mathematics disorder. If you're not good in math, you're disordered. Yeah, I got that bad. They go on with caffeine intoxication disorder. You drink too much coffee, you got an intoxication disorder.
And you need to take drugs for it, right?
Probably. They probably got drugs for all these things. You're not going to go to a psychiatrist's office and tell them anything and come out without some kind of drug.
Oh, yeah.
That's all they got.
That's all the first experience at a psychiatrist. I wanted to go, this is many years ago in New York City. I wanted to go to a therapist, and I went to one, and I knew it was the wrong fit completely, but I'll just never forget, like it was a half-hour conversation, and out of that surface level, superficial conversation, right away offered Ambien. And it was a joke, and I just laughed, and I thought, this is asinine. New York City is full of that, though. That really is all that's there, because they don't even allow you to really find holistic health there, because they block it purposefully, obviously. It wasn't surprising, but it's horrendous, because that's what people get stuck in as an option, as if it's an option.
Yeah, it's like they don't have any other option. And they've taken over the government, too.
Oh, yeah.
So the drug companies and psychiatry, they've taken over they took it over in 1910 with Carnegie.
Yes.
I'll talk about that in a minute, but let's go through another couple of these crazy disorders. So what they have, these group of psychiatrists, 2/3 of which are associated with big pharma, that meet every few years, and they make these things up. So they put out these calls for these things. And, anybody got some new mental illnesses do you want to talk about? And they come in, and they said it worked like a tobacco barn, where they vote these things in and they vote them out. The guy comes in, he goes, "Oh yeah, I got a new mental illness. It's this, and and this is what it looks like." And then they go, "Can we make a drug to sell to treat this thing?" And if they can't, they probably toss it out. So they vote them in, they vote them out. Some of these are totally ridiculous. You have kids fighting or sibling relational disorder. The DSM-2, they called homosexuality sexual orientation disturbance. They got something called the Florence syndrome, which is one of their diagnoses. That's being overwhelmed by beauty, such as in Florence, Italy. The symptoms are fainting and dizziness, and the treatment suggested is antidepressant medication. Paris syndrome, mostly experienced by Japanese patients visiting France. Symptoms include depression, anxiety, and feelings of persecution. They would have called that in my day, they would have called that culture shock. No, now it's a disorder. You can put 10 of these jokers in the same room together and give them a semi-complex diagnosis and they'll come up with a different diagnosis. It's nuts. It's nuts what they're doing.
It's deplorable.
So
It's
the,
yeah.
the medical establishment was taken over in 1910 by the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group
Yep.
that sponsored the infamous Flexner Report, which shut down any medical school teaching subjects outside of mainstream pharmacology. So
Yep.
here you got the Rockefeller and all these rich guys go, we need to make money off of drugs. So we want the medical schools to be teaching pharmacological stuff. That all stuff is cured by drugs. Doesn't work with psychiatry. Doesn't work with psychology. It said the edict was so powerful that only a few medical schools survived, such as Johns Hopkins and McGill, and a handful of others connected with these groups. They were the only schools that could legally license doctors. Doctors who practiced any other method beside pharmacological medicine were threatened with the loss of their license.
Yep.
Anybody else was labeled cracks. So the acupuncture guys were cracks, the naturopaths were cracks, herbalists were quacks, everybody's quacks except them. So they got everybody to believe that these are actual real illnesses. Basically, all they're doing is describing symptoms. I'm seeing this as I'm working at the state hospital. I'm seeing this biochemical imbalance crap makes no sense. They have no baseline. They're not taking anything. They don't even know what the chemical imbalance should be. It's a lie. They perpetuate it in the graduate schools. All these people that are working there have bought into it. The entire staff, hundreds of them, believed that this was a biochemical imbalance and that mental illness was caused by a biochemical imbalance because this is what they were told in graduate school. And you don't question people in graduate school, they get pissed off. You don't question them. You look at what's going on, and then they have no proof of it. And then you got this Eli Lilly company lying their butts off for profit. And then now you have the universities teaching this, and they're still teaching it, even though it's been disproven over and over again. But now they changed their advertisement. The drug companies have changed their advertisement to, oh, it is now believed mental illness or schizophrenia is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain, and that our wonderful drugs do something about that. It's lie after lie after lie. The next one that I ran into was that the voices were hallucinations. Here's many hundreds of staff working at the state hospital here. It was like a small city. None of them were the least bit interested in what the voices were telling these patients. And you can see that if the patients are listening to these voices, they're getting worse. They're getting more agitated, they're getting angrier, they're getting more violent, they're getting more disruptive. It was clear. So, what are these things telling these people? They just blew it off. It was like, oh, we already know the answer. They're hallucinations. You're not going to look for an answer if you think you already know it. But they weren't the least bit curious. None of them, hundreds of them, none of them were curious. What were the voices saying? So I started asking these schizophrenic patients, what are the voices telling you? Now it took about a year and a half or close to 2 years to figure out how to talk to them about this because there is no benefit to them telling you about the voices. Everybody they tell about the voices shuns them. It goes, you're weird, you're crazy, there's something wrong with you. They're afraid of them.
And that's how they ended up there in the first place.
That's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
And then they tell the psychiatrist, oh, I'm hearing voices, and that they won't take their meds, then they throw them in the hospital. And that's what the voices are telling them in the first place. If you tell anybody about us, you're going to end up locked up or they're going to drug you silly. And it's actually happening. So what the voices are telling them is actually happening.
Yeah.
One of the first things I found by asking patients, what are the voices telling you, was that they were totally negative. They were abusive. They were derogatory. They were destructive. They never said anything positive. It was always negative. And it was like, I was thinking, I've seen people who were hallucinating. There was no pattern to it. They're all over the place. Some of the hallucinations are good and people are laughing. And sometimes they're bad and sometimes they're negative and sometimes they're just nonsense. There's no pattern to it. This was a pattern. All of them were telling me the voices were consistently negative. If they were telling them something positive, it was only to turn around and get them later. So I'm like, What would hold these voices to that pattern? Why weren't they random, like hallucinations? Why weren't they all over the place? What was holding them on that negative pattern? Something was, because they didn't go beyond it. It was always negative. So that got my curiosity up. And then I got caught. I was talking to one patient whose voices didn't like me asking questions about them, and he went and told one of the psychiatrists that I was asking questions about his voices, and that upset him. The next morning, I ended up in that psychiatrist's office on the red carpet, being ordered to not ask patients about their voices because the voices were hallucinations. And what I was doing by asking them questions about them was reinforcing the hallucinations and making the patients worse. Now, you can't say anything to these psychiatrists. They're arrogant as the day is long. You can't say anything back to them. You can't reason to them. They're like the Egyptian priests back in the Egyptian day. They just run the mental health system, and you have nothing to say about it. You have to do what they say. They're given all the power. They got all the political power. They got all the medical power, and the doctors don't want to mess with this stuff. The medical doctors. So they're the ones running the show. And you look at what a mess it is. We talked about what a mess the Western mental health system is. And then you look at the mental health of these people, of the psychiatrists themselves. You look up their suicide rate. Schizophrenics have a suicide rate of 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. They kill themselves at a very high rate. The suicide rate for psychiatrists is almost identical.
Wow.
And these are the people running the Western mental health system right now. They know nothing about spirituality. They don't know the cause of the disorders they're treating. They know that they're not curing anything, and they're not looking for cure. They're making a fortune off of this nonsense. Matter of fact, it's so bad. I live 60 miles north of the Mexican border here. It costs about $800 to $1,000 to keep a schizophrenic level on medications in the U.S. bought through a pharmacy in the U.S. You got to pay what, $200 to go see a psychiatrist, and you get a prescription, and now you got to go to take the prescription to the pharmacist, and then you got to pay the pharmacist, and then you got to get the drugs. It's coming out to a bill of close to $1,000 a month. You go into Mexico, you can get these same drugs made by the same companies in a lot of cases for $75 over the counter. They're not abusable drugs. Nobody wants to take them. They have awful side effects. You don't get high on them, but yet the psychiatrists are like grabbing onto them like this. They don't want to let go. They don't even want general practitioners prescribing psychiatric drugs. They give them a hard time about it. We're the experts. We're the ones who deal with these drugs. We know these drugs. They're not curing anything with those drugs.
No.
I already told you how dangerous they were.
And this is the truth of this stems throughout the entire medical complex in general. It's interesting as you're talking, I just keep thinking about the complete fraud that Louis Pasteur was, and all these paid for quote unquote scientists or doctors to come up with the narrative and the agenda, and to continue the agenda and the narrative to keep the big pharma machine in control.
And boy, they've pulled the wool over the eyes of all of us. And again, here's some more statistics with regard to psychiatrists. The Journal of American Medical Association said that the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 5.9 times that of the general population. 5.9 times higher. The Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in August 1980 did a 5-year study of 18,730 consecutive physician deaths by suicide, and found that psychiatrists regularly suicided at a rate year by year more than twice that expected. And these differences were clinically significant. They have a suicide rate 3 to 5 times higher than most other doctors. And they're assaulted at a rate higher than any other doctors. These are the people running the mental health system under the thumb of Big Pharma. The biological imbalance crap was a scam. It wasn't that. So what was causing mental illness? And once I found out that was a scam, then I'm like, okay, if it's not a biochemical imbalance, then what is it? So I started asking questions about these voices, but I had to be very careful because at the state hospital, You don't do anything. There's an unwritten rule because psychiatrists were getting beat up at a horrendous rate by schizophrenic patients. And the reason for that was that the voices didn't like those drugs because those drugs calmed down the patient. They didn't want the patient calm. They wanted him ravenous and crazy so they could get their loosh from him. They wanted that negative emotional energy. They didn't want no psychiatrists drugging them up. So they were peaceful. So the psychiatrist was actually interfering with their feeding. So they would tell these patients that the psychiatrist was poisoning them. And then if you look at the side effects of now this I already read you the ones for Geodone. Now the ones for antidepressant drugs, nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, low sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle seizures. That's for antidepressants. So the antipsychotics are even worse. So what the voices would say, your psychiatrist is poisoning you. Look at these side effects. These are toxic side effects. You're being poisoned. And they
And they
believed it.
weren't wrong on that note.
And they weren't wrong on that note. When they went to see the psychiatrist, the voices would tell them, he's killing you. He's forcing you to take these medications. He's killing you. Beat the crap out of them. Their assault rate for psychiatrists is very high, higher than almost any other doctor. I have it here somewhere, but just take my word for it. It's very high. And they were always getting beat up at the hospital where I was. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. What's going on with that? They're only spending 15, 20 minutes a month with these people. What are they saying to these schizophrenics that's causing them to attack them in 15 minutes? It didn't make any sense.
15 minutes a month.
15, 20 minutes a month.
That in and of itself says so much.
And the question basically was, how are your drugs working? Do you need them changed? You need them increased, up or down? You need to change them? Are they working? It's all about the drugs, nothing about the person. After 2 times of getting in trouble for asking schizophrenics about what their voices are saying, I had to really slow down and fly underneath the radar.
Underneath the evil ivory tower eye.
Yeah. Learned that these things ran patterns there. The second pattern, I learned there were 4 major patterns that I learned about while I was at the state hospital. The second one is these voices are anti-religious. They did not like preachers. They did not like the patients going to church. They did not like them reading the Bible. They did not like them praying. And this was consistent. And I'm like, notice that when the preacher gave a ice cream social at the rehab center where I worked, none of the schizophrenics went. They stayed on the dingy ward and would read monster books or murder mysteries or watch war movies or negative stuff. It was all negative stuff. And I'd ask them, what after I noticed that the first time, and then the second time I noticed it again. It was only the schizophrenics that were staying behind. And I would ask them, why are you staying on the dingy ward when you got ice cream and cake downstairs and dancing and music? Oh, I don't like preachers. There is no God. I prayed and that didn't work. They were completely anti-religious. They didn't want anything to do with it. And then I remember one day, one guy came in and he goes, he told me that he recited the 23rd Psalm while his voices were attacking him. And he said they reacted like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan.
Yeah.
So I started passing out the 23rd Psalm and asking the patients how the voices reacted to them. In all cases, the voices hated it. So then I started asking patients about going to church. What happened when they went to church? And I did a survey. I found that if the voices were very weak, they went to church, the voices shut up. If the voices were of moderate strength and they went to church, the voices would kick up and get louder. They'd start mocking the preacher and saying what he's saying is a bunch of crap and why are you wasting your time here? This is stupid. There is no God. And if the voices were very strong, they would actually drive them out of a church. Actually drive them. They would get up and they would run out. And then there was complaint after complaint about when the patient tried to read the Bible, the voices would go nuts. They wouldn't let them pray. And it's like, that's odd. Why would a hallucination constantly be negative and why would it be anti-religious? Doesn't make any sense. So they were consistently anti-religious. They didn't want anything to do with God, Jesus. And this wasn't just with Christianity. This was with Muslim and anything else. Any positive spiritual practice. They didn't want anything any of the person to do anything with. So, and the next one that came up was they would actually tell the patients bad things to make them upset, and then their energy would disappear. So I started asking them, I did a survey. It was like, how much energy do you have before the voices came? How much energy do you have after they came? I had one patient tell me I could actually feel my energy disappearing
Hmm.
while they were attacking me. So I did a big survey, and it was like a 1 to 10 scale. How much energy did you have before the voices came? How much energy did you have after the voices came? And I did this with maybe 100 schizophrenics. They consistently had more energy before the voices came and much less afterward. And that was statistically significant. I think we ran an analysis of variance on it. So it was statistically significant. There's something going on there. So these, and then you ask the patient about it. Where'd your energy go? I don't know. They had no idea. You go, okay, if you stuck your hand in a fire 100 times and you got burned 100 times, what's burning you? They had no trouble going the fire, but they couldn't get the idea that there's a 1 to 1 correlation between these voices attacking them and their energy disappearing. And you would ask them, okay, if the voices, you've been hearing the voices for years, they've come thousands of times, and every time they came, your energy disappeared. Where'd your energy go? I don't know. They were being blocked from that information. And that's one of the things that the voices do not want their victim to know, that these things are parasites and that they're feeding off of them. And it's not just them that they're feeding off of, they're feeding off of all of us.
Yeah,
Every negative thought that flows through our heads is put there by these entities.
exactly.
And they're trying to create a negative emotional response. And this list goes on and on. So, what this list is, it's a list of patterns these voices run. And I'm just going to quickly read some of them. They get louder after sunset. Now, this is in the open. This isn't genetic bullcrap. This isn't biochemical
Imbalance.
balance bullcrap.
Yeah.
You talk to a schizophrenic and you will see these patterns. They're there right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is open them. Those of you who are working with schizophrenics or have schizophrenics kids or in your family or know schizophrenics, they all are having these patterns. Okay. If they're running patterns, if the voices are running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. So psychiatry and big pharma and the universities have their heads where the sun don't shine. They haven't done a single research on any of these things. They don't even ask any questions about. They just teach that they're hallucinations because they say they are. They're like the Egyptian priests of old getting up on the stand and going, they're hallucinations because we say they are, and we're psychiatrists and we're pharmacists and we're doctors. So we tell you what to think. You think what we say.
Yeah.
And then you pay us money for these toxic drugs.
And they probably, in an incarnation wise, probably actually were the priests.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Their income depends on this bullshit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So the voices get louder after sunset. So what these are, this is the operational definition of voices. This is what they are. This is how they act. Okay. So you get a magnetic field with a big magnet. You can't see that field. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't touch it. For all practical purposes, it's not there. Okay. You get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on that magnetic field. Now you can see that magnetic field. Now it shows up. This is the magnetic field for schizophrenia, for paranoid schizophrenia. This is what's showing up. You can see it with your own eyes if you can get close enough to a schizophrenic to see it. These patterns are there. They're running patterns, they're not hallucinations. So the voices get louder after sunset. Ask the schizophrenic about it. If you're working with them, if you have one in your family, ask them if these are true. This is how the voices run. This is their operational definition. They get louder when ignored. They will not be ignored. They foster self destructive behavior. They tell the person to cut himself, to kill himself, to hurt other people, to do stuff to screw themselves over. They're self destructive. They foster isolation. They want the person away from everybody. They don't want them to have any friends. They don't want them to have any family. They want them in their bedroom listening to the voices all the time. That's the worst thing you could let happen to a schizophrenic. is to let them isolate. They demand the attention of their victims. They will not shut up. They maneuver for increased control over the victim. What they're actually doing is trying to push the victim's personality out of the way, and they're telling them that the thoughts that the voices are putting in their head belong to them, that they're their thoughts. Now, we believe that from the time we're kids. You hear thoughts in your head. You hear thousands of thoughts in your head every day. These voices are putting these thoughts into your thought stream. They don't belong to you. I've had a number of schizophrenics ask these voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And they will say, "We are you." So they want you to believe that those negative thoughts that they're putting in your head belong to you when they're coming from them. If you believe that, you're screwed. You're
Yeah.
going to be in trouble. They gaslight. I had one schizophrenic where they had him convinced that he had murdered somebody, but he was so unstable he doesn't remember whether he did or not. So what happened with him is every time he heard or saw a cop car, he freaked out, and the voices would say, "They're looking for you. They're searching for you. You better go hide somewhere." So they had him in a catch 22 where he was constantly generating negative emotional energy for them. Every time he heard a siren, every time he saw a cop car, he freaked out. They manipulate perception. So you could be a schizophrenic could be walking on the street and a couple of kids or crack a joke or something. They start laughing. The voices will tell the patient that they're laughing at you. All right. Ideas of reference, they call it. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They're energetic. They're not physical. Thoughts are energetic. Memory's energetic. Feelings are energetic. They can go in there, they can pull up every rotten thing you did and throw it in your face until they make you pissed off or paranoid or feeling rotten. They demand that the victim not tell anybody about their presence. They want the schizophrenic to keep completely silent, and they will sometimes punish the person if they do start talking about them. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. You can't trust anything they say. They constantly steer the victim toward away from joy or anything that might generate joy. They can manipulate feeling without speaking. They can just get in there and all of a sudden you just start feeling rotten for no reason. That's them. They can short circuit reason. They can convince you that somebody's drilling a hole in your ceiling and watching you 24 hours a day, or somebody's moving things around your apartment. And what's most dangerous about them is they try to pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. If they succeed in that, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And what surprised me is they don't sound different than the thousands of other thoughts that run through your mind on a normal day. There's no, "We are the voices and we demand you do this." There's nothing like that. They sound just like the thousand of other thoughts that run through your mind on a normal day. Only the content is very different and the intention is very different.
Highly negative, always, always.
Highly negative. They will cause selective forgetting. So I could give a patient a list of things. Well, okay, this is what you do to fight them. If they don't write those down, they will have forgotten 75% of them by the time they left my office.
Yeah.
They want to destroy any vestige of positive self-concept in a person. They will just keep on them. They want them to get to the place where they just feel like they don't deserve to live. They will try to pull the person away from consensual reality. They'll use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions. They're averse to anything positive or beautiful. Any attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that the voices are energetic parasites will be met by an explosion. They do not like that. Okay, so these are the patterns that they were running. And then when I left the state hospital, I worked in the emergency room for a while. I worked for the mental health center for several years, and then took a job with the psychology department at the state prison. It was a much more secure job, higher paying, and that's where I really got to study these voices. I always had around me a group of 10 to 15 schizophrenic patients that were willing to tell me in real time what the voices were telling them while we were in the office talking. So I had a window into their mind, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I still wasn't sure what these things were. I saw I could carry on conversations with them. I could see that the patient would carry on conversations with them. I could see what they were telling them. So I started wondering is what will happen if I start messing with these patterns? What if I started interfering with these patterns? What would happen? So I started devising homework for these prisoners and said, okay, try this. Come back in a week and tell me what happened. And one after another, they would come back after a couple of weeks. They'd say, the voices don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like us doing these exercises. They don't want us to come see you anymore. They think you're a crazy, crazy man. They don't want us coming. And the prisoners were just as interested in what these voices were as I was. It's, what are they? And I go, I don't know. Let's see what they are. Let's experiment, see what they do. So they got pissed off. They didn't want to be interfered with.
Yeah.
And then the more things that I found that would interfere with these patterns, the angrier they got. So one day, one of the prisoners I've been working with for months, he stops after our session. He stopped in the doorway, turns around, looks at me, and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And then he just looked at me and he turned around and left. And I'm like, what was that all about? It's like, I just sat there. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him and he turned around and walked away. And I'm like, okay, what was that? What's going on there? And I just filed it in the back of my head. But I'm thinking, the voices are in their heads. They can't come out of their heads. They can't come out and get me. You know, little did I know.
Yeah, so, I wanted to talk to you a little more in depth about that. I know you mentioned in the book an incident with electric, so we can talk about that. But I would love to also go into, obviously there's some serious protection, energetic protection through spiritual means there's a lot of ways to discuss that, but obviously your energetic field needed to be protected as well.
Well, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I couldn't back away from this.
Yeah.
You know? And it started becoming more and more intense and more frightening. Let me see. Kino was later. I would pray before I went into the prison every day. I would pray for protection. I never went in there without praying.
Yeah.
And so watch out for me. And the same guy, it was a few weeks later, he knocks at my door. I don't know how he got into the medical unit without a pass, but he's knocking at my door. I opened the door and I was surprised to see him. And he goes, the voices want to talk to you. And I'm like, they want to talk to me personally? He goes, yeah, they want to talk to you personally. That had never happened before. 20 years of investigating voices, that had never happened. So I'm like, okay, come on in, sit down. And I closed the door and I said, what do they got to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And the prisoner said, those weren't my words, but they came from the voices. I didn't say that, honest to God. That was them. And I went to tell him, I said, tell them. And I just got those words out of my mouth. And he said, I don't have to tell them anything. They can see you. They can hear you. And I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, this shit just got real.
Yeah, this just got real.
Yeah.
You know, and that took me back. My head exploded. It was like, that was, my denial system was already in shambles. But I didn't want to believe that these things were separate entities. I just didn't want to believe it. I'm going, it must be some psychological something in their subconscious or something like that. But the more evidence kept piling up and piling up. I think anybody else would have come to the conclusion that they were entities long before I did. It took that to blow my mind, and my denial system completely collapsed. It just collapsed. And I went into a shock. It was like, they are real. They are entities. They are negative entities, demonic, evil spirits.
Yeah.
And I sat there staring out the window. I just canceled all my clients for that day. I think I probably didn't go into work the next day. I was so shocked.
So don't forget to catch part 2 with Jerry Marzinsky. I know this one was left in a bit of a cliffhanger. In the next part of the series, you'll hear what happened next when Jerry returned to work, and then when he actually became more confronting to the voices that were attached to many unfortunate souls that he was working with in this prison. So you won't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to the Disrupt Now podcast. Please leave us a review. Also, if you want to get these episodes to your inbox, go to disruptnowpodcast.com and you can drop your email in. You can also see all of the episodes since day 1. If you'd like to connect, we have a couple of different ways. You can join us on Telegram. The group is called Awakening Magick. Or if you want to drop a line, email us at info@natalieviglione.com. Thank you for being here on this journey to awaken the magic again.